Chapter 1. Before Humans. Long before fire, before tools, before language, humans did not exist. The African continent was wild and vast, a world unshaped by human hands. Forests stretched endlessly, rivers carved winding paths through dense greenery, and the air hummed with life in every crevice. Sunlight filtered in fractured beams through the canopy, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor. High above, primates moved with silent agility. They were small, lean, and cautious. Every sound mattered. Every movement might signal food or death. Eyes, sharp and calculating, tracked every leaf that trembled, every branch that snapped. Survival demanded attention. There was no room for distraction, no margin for error. Life in the trees was a delicate balance. Limbs curved around branches, tails balanced weight, and hands that would one day evolve into tools gripped bark as if every branch were a lifeline. But the forest itself was changing. Climate shifts, subtle yet relentless, were transforming the world. Rainfall became unpredictable. Trees thinned, leaving open gaps where sunlight scorched the ground. Grasslands crept in slowly, replacing shade with exposure. A choice emerged for those primates: retreat into the remaining forest or venture into the unknown. Some stayed high in the trees, clinging to their ancestral home. Others descended to the forest floor, their bodies awkward, their instincts untested. This was the first step toward something new. A small shift in behavior, driven by necessity, would ripple through millennia. Life was about to change forever. Chapter 2. The First Steps. The ground was dangerous. On the forest floor, predators moved with a confidence that the primates had never faced. Crocodiles waded in rivers, hyenas scavenged with brutal efficiency, and saber-toothed cats prowled the open plains. Standing upright, once awkward and unbalanced, became an advantage. Eyes lifted above the grass. Hands were free to carry food, to defend, to manipulate. Australopithecus emerged in this shifting world. Their bodies were imperfectly adapted, a strange combination of ape and something more. Legs carried them across uneven terrain, shoulders and arms still suited to climbing, hands able to grasp both food and tools. The brain remained small, yet the hands free, precise, and flexible hinted at a future that no one could yet imagine. Every meal became a negotiation with the environment. Tubers dug from hard earth, fruits plucked from thorny bushes, insects crushed for protein. Each bite required awareness, strategy, patience, and every moment carried risk. Predators did not sleep. The ground itself could betray you, but the shift had begun. Freed hands, upright posture, these small, subtle changes set the stage for the evolution of mind, culture, and ingenuity. Survival now depended not just on instinct, but on foresight. Chapter 3. A Dangerous World. The world outside the forest was merciless. Nights offered no refuge. Sleep came in short, cautious bursts. Every sound, a rustle, a snap, a low growl could be the last. Life demanded vigilance. Cooperation became a survival strategy. Alone, a primate might last a day, a week at most. Together they could hunt, share warmth, alert each other to threats, and protect the young. Groups formed, hierarchies emerged, and bonds fragile yet vital held them together. Every encounter with a predator was a lesson. The slow, the distracted, the weak, these would not survive. Adaptation was not optional. Intelligence was not yet fully realized, but patterns were remembered. Paths, water sources, predator behavior all were stored in the mind and the rhythms of life itself. Chapter 4. The Birth of Hominins. Over hundreds of thousands of years, bodies began to change in response to the pressures of survival. Legs lengthened, hips reshaped, feet strengthened for long-distance travel. Brains grew slowly, subtly, a silent revolution in thought and perception. This was not evolution guided by conscious thought, but by necessity. Hunger, danger, and environmental change sculpted flesh and bone. The hominin lineage emerged something no longer fully ape, yet not entirely human. These were the ancestors of a future species that would one day ask not just how to survive, but why. Chapter 5. Stone and Blood. At some point, a hand grasped a stone with intent. Not by accident, not by play. It was struck against another, creating a sharp edge. This was the birth of technology. Tools allowed access to new food sources, meat, marrow, roots, transforming nutrition and energy intake. But tools were also weapons. They could defend, intimidate, or destroy. For the first time, survival was intertwined with creation. The same hands that grasped branches now shaped the world. And yet, with every stone, every strike, came a deeper awareness of power and its consequences. Chapter 6. Human against human. As groups grew, conflict became inevitable. Territory, food, and mates sparked disputes. Violence was not planned war, but a natural extension of survival instincts. Bones broke, flesh bled, trust was fragile. Through this, early humans learned a critical lesson. The greatest threat sometimes comes not from nature, but from each other. Cooperation became a delicate dance with competition, shaping social dynamics for generations to come. Chapter 7. Predators of the Past. Imagine standing on a sun-scorched plain. No walls, no refuge. Only the vast expanse and the constant hum of life and death. Movement in the distance signals a predator. Saber-toothed cats, massive and lethal, stalk prey with precision. Running is not always an option. Survival depends on awareness, strategy, and the strength of the group. The slowest or the weakest rarely survives, teaching an unspoken lesson about adaptation, sacrifice, and vigilance. Chapter 8. Fire. At first, fire was feared. Lightning strikes ignited grasslands, and animals fled. Slowly, humans approached it with caution, learning to contain it, protect it, and eventually control it. Fire became warmth, defense, and sustenance. Cooked food increased caloric intake, fueling larger brains. Around fire, humans discovered communication. Not language yet, but shared understanding, ritual, and the beginnings of culture. Fire was not merely a tool. It was a turning point in consciousness itself. Chapter 9. Surviving the Ice. Ice ages transformed the planet. Glaciers expanded, sea levels fell, deserts spread. Humans moved with them, crossing frozen land bridges, adapting with clothing, shelters, and strategies. Survival required planning, foresight, and innovation. The mind became as vital as muscle, and intelligence began to emerge as the ultimate survival tool. Chapter 10. What we became. By the time Homo sapiens arose, survival was no longer instinct alone. Memory, teaching, imagination, they became as essential as strength and agility. Questions emerged. Who are we? Where do we come from? What does it mean to be human? We had become more than observers of nature. We had begun to shape it. And with that shaping came the first glimpse of a world beyond mere survival. A world of possibility, reflection, and consciousness. Chapter 11, Crossing New Horizons. The world was vast, far larger than any one group could dominate. Rivers twisted like silver snakes through endless plains. Mountains rose abruptly, their peaks wreathed in clouds. The horizon beckoned and early humans answered. Migration became more than movement, it was a necessity. Food scarcity, climate shifts, and the pressure of predators pushed groups into unfamiliar lands. Every journey carried risk, treacherous terrain, unfamiliar predators, strange weather. Yet, in each step, humans discovered more than survival. They discovered possibility. Paths were remembered. Landmarks became shared knowledge. Oral memory began to form, subtle yet powerful, passing lessons from one generation to the next. Each migration taught humans resilience, patience, and awareness. They learned to watch the sky, read the land, and predict the movements of both prey and predator. In crossing these horizons, humans began to shape the world as much as it shaped them. The environment tested their ingenuity. It demanded new strategies, new alliances, and over time, new tools. Each migration was not just a journey, it was a school of survival, a forge for intellect, and the first chapter in a story that would stretch across the globe. Chapter 12, The Art of Hunting. Hunting was more than food, it was survival, training, and social cohesion. Groups coordinated with gestures, signals, and intuition. Each hunt required timing, patience, and understanding of animal behavior. Spears, clubs, and sharpened stones became extensions of the body. Humans learned to exploit weaknesses, to predict movement, to work as a unit. Success fed not only the body, but also the mind as humans began to plan, communicate, and innovate in ways that no other species could. Yet hunting carried constant risk. A misjudged step, a misread signal, or an overconfident approach could mean death. The thrill of the hunt came paired with respect for prey, for predators, and for the delicate balance of life. Through hunting, humans learned more than survival. They learned cooperation, strategy, and the subtle dynamics of group behavior. The hunt became a mirror of society itself, reflecting both strength and vulnerability. Chapter 13, Families and Tribes. Small bands formed, each member playing a role in survival. Mothers, fathers, siblings, elders, everyone contributed. Food was shared. Danger was warned. Knowledge was taught. These early tribes were fragile, yet resilient. Bonds were reinforced through care, protection, and shared experiences. Infants learned from observation, absorbing gestures, tones, and movements that shaped their futures. Storytelling began not in words, but in patterns, gestures, and sounds. Memory became collective. Culture began to form. Conflict still existed, but cooperation often outweighed aggression. Groups that worked together thrived. Those that did not vanished. In these early social networks, humans discovered a fundamental truth. Survival depended not only on strength, but also on empathy, trust, and understanding. Chapter 14, Language and Shadow. Before words existed, humans spoke in shadow. Sounds, gestures, facial expressions, these were the building blocks of communication. A raised hand could warn of danger. A pointed finger could indicate food. A shared look could unite a group. Over time, these signals became more complex. Patterns emerged, sequences repeated. Memory encoded lessons and experiences. These early forms of language were crude but powerful, capable of shaping group behavior, warning of threats, and coordinating action. Communication was no longer instinctive alone, it became strategic. This subtle mastery over symbols would lay the groundwork for culture, art, and eventually, the stories that define humanity. Chapter 15. Adapting to the Seasons. The world changed constantly. Wet seasons brought floods. Dry seasons brought drought. Temperatures rose and fell unpredictably. Humans could not control these changes, they could only adapt. Clothing made from hides protected against cold and abrasion. Shelters evolved from natural caves to constructed lean-tos. Food was stored, sometimes hidden, to buffer against scarcity. Humans learned timing, when to hunt, when to forage, when to move. Seasonal adaptation was a silent teacher. It demanded foresight, planning, and innovation. Each challenge reinforced the lessons that survival was as much about intelligence and strategy as strength or agility. Chapter 16. The Rituals of Survival. Early humans began marking moments, not just with tools, but with ritual. Fire became central not just for warmth, but for gathering. Around flames, groups mimicked the movements of prey, repeated the sounds of animals, and shared the rhythms of the forest. These rituals were small, but profound. They reinforced community, transmitted knowledge, and gave meaning to life in a dangerous world. Humans were beginning to create not just survival strategies, but culture itself, an echo of thought and reflection that would ripple through generations. Chapter 17. Shaping Stone and Bone. Stone tools grew more sophisticated. Flakes were sharpened, edges refined. Bones were fashioned into points, hooks, and awls. Each tool reflected intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving. The act of shaping a tool became a meditation on survival. Hands, once designed only for climbing, now manipulated the world. Each strike of stone against stone was deliberate, calculated, purposeful. Humans were not only adapting, they were beginning to design their destiny. Chapter 18. Territory and Travel. Humans understood land not as ownership, but as survival space. Knowledge of rivers, hills, hunting grounds, and seasonal shelters dictated life. Encounters with other groups could bring cooperation or conflict. Travel became strategic. Scouts probed new territories. Paths were memorized. Decisions carried weight. A wrong choice could mean starvation, injury, or death. Humans were learning to read landscapes, weather, and the behaviors of both prey and predator. Knowledge became power. Chapter 19. The Seeds of Society. From survival emerged structure. Roles became semi-fixed. Hunters, gatherers, lookouts, teachers. Knowledge of fire, tools, and territory was passed intentionally. Elders began shaping the next generation, guiding them through experience rather than instinct alone. Hierarchy was fluid but necessary. Cooperation had limits. Conflict arose, but rules began to form subtle codes of behavior that balanced competition with survival. Humans were discovering the principles of society before society existed. Chapter 20. Reflections of the Mind. By now, the human mind was more than reactive. Observation, memory, and inference intertwined. Humans began to contemplate themselves and their environment. They asked questions they could not yet answer. Why do the seasons change? Why do animals behave as they do? What is danger, and how can it be tamed? These reflections were nascent philosophy. Humans were not yet conscious in the way we understand today, but the spark had been lit. Survival was no longer only physical. It had become mental, emotional, and social. The mind was awakening. Chapter 21. Reaching New Lands. Humans pushed beyond familiar forests and plains, stepping into landscapes they had never seen. Mountains loomed like barriers, deserts stretched endlessly, and coastlines shimmered with unfamiliar tides. Every step carried risk: wild predators, unpredictable weather, and unknown terrain. Yet curiosity drove them onward, a subtle force as potent as hunger or fear. Migration was no longer mere survival, it was exploration. Paths were measured, landmarks memorized, and knowledge recorded in gestures, marks, and ritual repetition. Each new land became a test. Could humans adapt, or would they perish? Along the way, humans learned patience. They learned to watch waterholes, observe animal migrations, and read the clouds. Survival became a blend of instinct and intelligence. And as humans crossed rivers and plains, the memory of these journeys began to weave into stories, a shared history that bound groups together. Chapter 22. The Invention of Tools. Stone tools evolved beyond sharp edges. Chisels, scrapers, and points appeared, designed for specific tasks. Bone, antler, and wood joined stone, creating a versatile toolkit. Each innovation reflected thought, foresight, and trial. Humans experimented, failed, and refined. The act of creating a tool became a mental exercise solving a problem before it arose, anticipating needs and imagining outcomes. Tools changed life profoundly. They expanded diets, allowing humans to process new foods. They provided defense against predators and facilitated hunting in ways raw strength could not. But more than utility, tools became a reflection of the mind itself, a bridge between thought and action. Chapter 23. Hunting as Strategy. Hunting evolved from instinct to strategy. Humans observed herds, tracked footprints, and studied predator-prey interactions. A hunt was no longer merely chase and kill. It was planning, cooperation, and adaptation. Groups coordinated silently, communicating through gestures and subtle sounds. Roles became fluid but organized. Some drove prey, others waited in ambush, others guarded vulnerable members. Every hunt became a lesson in teamwork, trust, and timing. Failure could mean starvation. Success reinforced memory and learning. Through hunting, humans were refining more than technique. They were refining thought, observation, and social cohesion. Strategy became a mirror for early society. Chapter 24. The Rise of Symbols. Marks on stones, scratches in wood, pigments on surfaces. Humans began leaving traces of their minds. Not yet art, but symbols. These early signs recorded events, warned of danger, or commemorated achievement. Symbolic behavior was revolutionary. It meant humans were thinking beyond the immediate, planning for the future, and creating a shared language of meaning. The mind was expanding. Memory was externalized. Lessons could be preserved outside the fragile confines of the brain. This was the first step toward culture, ritual, and storytelling. Humans were learning to leave pieces of themselves behind, echoes for those who came next. Chapter 25, Storytelling begins. Around fire, humans began to communicate past experiences, not in words, but in rhythm, tone, and gesture. Stories of hunts, encounters, and survival circulated, teaching, warning, and inspiring. Stories were more than memory. They were instruction, warning, and entertainment. They encoded survival wisdom in a form that could be transmitted, repeated, and refined. The group's past became a shared resource, shaping identity and guiding action. Humans were discovering imagination. They could reconstruct events, envision alternatives, and contemplate consequences. In this way, storytelling became a powerful tool for survival itself. Chapter 26, Migration Across Continents. Groups crossed rivers, deserts, and mountain ranges, reaching continents that no human had seen before. Climate, geography, and food availability dictated routes. Migration was dangerous but necessary. With each new land came new challenges: predators, unfamiliar flora, and extreme weather. Humans adapted by refining tools, clothing, and shelters. Knowledge of the environment became a survival map encoded in memory and ritual. Migration also fostered diversity. Groups separated by distance evolved unique behaviors, tools, and social practices. Yet a common thread remained. Humans everywhere relied on observation, cooperation, and reflection to survive. Chapter 27, The Ice Bridges. During ice ages, sea levels fell, revealing land bridges. Humans crossed from continent to continent, spreading into Asia, Europe, and eventually the Americas. These journeys demanded endurance, ingenuity, and mental resilience. Food sources were scarce, weather could kill. Groups traveled slowly, often stopping for months to hunt, gather, and replenish energy. They learned to read ice and snow, rivers and wind, to predict patterns and avoid deadly traps. The ice bridges were more than physical pathways. They were metaphors for human curiosity and determination. Survival was no longer just local. It was global. Chapter 28, Early Shelters. Humans began constructing shelters beyond caves. Branches, leaves, animal hides, these materials became homes. Shelters protected against weather, predators, and exposure. But shelters also created space for social interaction. Around fires within these spaces, humans shared knowledge, comforted the young, and reinforced group identity. The act of building became both survival and culture, a tangible sign of human foresight. Architecture was primitive, but it reflected an essential truth. Humans could modify the environment to meet their needs. They could impose order on chaos. Chapter 29, Domestication of Fire. Fire was now controlled and portable. Humans learned to maintain it through night and season, moving sparks from one site to another. Fire extended days, protected the weak, and transformed food. Meat cooked over flames unlocked calories previously inaccessible, fueling brain growth. Fire became ritualized, central to identity, memory, and social cohesion. Humans had conquered a force of nature. They had not only survived it, they had shaped it. Fire became a symbol of knowledge, community, and the latent power of human ingenuity. Chapter 30, The Emergence of Memory. With tools, symbols, stories, and fire, humans began recording memory externally. Lessons of survival were no longer solely in the mind, they were preserved in the environment, in artifacts, in the rhythms of community. Memory became collective, binding groups across generations. Knowledge was cumulative. Mistakes were remembered, successes celebrated, and wisdom passed on. Humans were no longer simply reacting, they were planning, teaching, imagining. The mind had awakened fully. Survival now depended not just on instinct, but on reflection, learning, and foresight. Humanity, still young, was already leaving its mark on the world. Chapter 31. The Tribe as a System. Survival no longer depended solely on individual skill. It depended on the group. Tribes became systems of cooperation where every member had a role. Some hunted, others gathered, some guarded, others guided. Elders became living libraries of knowledge. Their memories held the patterns of seasons, the locations of water, and the behaviors of predators. Young members learned observation, imitation, and experimentation. Mistakes were corrected gently, knowledge passed carefully. Hierarchies were fluid but meaningful. Leaders emerged not by brute force alone, but through wisdom, experience, and foresight. Social cohesion became a form of defense. Unity was life. The tribe was more than survival, it was identity. Humans were learning that their strength lay not in isolation, but in connection. Chapter 32. Rituals of Fire and Life. Fire had become central to human existence. Around it, rituals took shape. Flames were tended, not merely for warmth, but for protection, storytelling, and social bonding. Groups mimicked animal movements, rehearsed hunts, and marked successful kills. Firelight illuminated faces, gestures, and subtle expressions, teaching empathy, communication, and anticipation. These rituals were early education, community reinforcement, and symbolic rehearsal all at once. Ritual gave structure to chaos. It allowed humans to impose meaning on survival, transforming fear into shared understanding. Life became more than mere endurance, it became shared experience. Chapter 33. The First Artists. Humans began leaving traces not just for instruction, but for expression. Pigments, scratches, and carvings appeared on stone, bone, and walls. Early art was practical and symbolic. A painting of a herd could teach hunting strategies. A carved figure could represent an ancestor or a spirit. Humans were beginning to encode thought, memory, and hope visually. Art was the first bridge between the inner mind and the external world. Humans were experimenting with representation, abstraction, and permanence. It was proof that survival alone could not contain their imagination. Chapter 34. Symbols and Spirits. Humans began seeing the world as more than physical. Certain animals, landscapes, or celestial events carried meaning. Lightning, storms, or eclipses were remembered, discussed, and woven into stories. Spirituality emerged subtly. Humans perceived forces beyond immediate perception, forces of luck, fate, or unseen power. Rituals reinforced this worldview, connecting individuals to their tribe, the land, and a larger sense of order. This spiritual awareness may have been subtle, but it shaped behavior profoundly. Respect for life, caution with predators, and the moral codes of cooperation were reinforced by these early beliefs. Humans were developing ethics alongside intelligence. Chapter 35. Refining Tools. Stone and bone tools grew more sophisticated. Chisels, scrapers, and projectile points were refined through repeated experimentation. Humans learned to match the tool to the task, cracking nuts, cutting hides, or hunting prey from distance. Observation and memory-guided design. A failed tool taught as much as a successful one. This refinement reflected foresight and planning. Humans were not only responding to immediate needs, they were anticipating future ones. Tool-making became a dialogue with the environment, a conversation between mind and matter. Chapter 36. Hunting and Strategy Evolves. Hunting became increasingly cooperative. Groups coordinated silently, tracked prey meticulously, and planned ambushes. Tactics evolved as humans learned animal behavior, environmental patterns, and each other's strengths. Hunting was teaching, ritual, and survival simultaneously. Every success reinforced strategy. Every failure taught adaptation. Humans were becoming not just hunters, but strategists capable of anticipating risk, managing resources, and teaching others to do the same. Chapter 37. Nurturing the Young. Infants and children were no longer left entirely to instinct. Observation and imitation became central to learning. Adults guided play, shaping motor skills, social behavior, and problem-solving. Stories, gestures, and ritualized lessons became early education. Memory was not only personal, but collective. Knowledge accumulated across generations, allowing humans to grow smarter as a species. Children were not merely survivors, they were carriers of wisdom, the future of humanity. Chapter 38. The Emergence of Language. Language began to take form. Gestures were paired with sounds, repeated sequences carried meaning, and shared understanding grew. Complex communication allowed coordination in hunting, warning of danger, and teaching skills. It enabled abstraction. Humans could now discuss the past, plan the future, and imagine scenarios beyond immediate perception. Language was not only functional, it shaped thought. Humans were developing self-awareness, social intelligence, and the capacity for reflection. The mind had become a tool as versatile as any stone or fire. Chapter 39. The First Celebrations. Groups began marking significant events. Successful hunts, births, or seasonal changes became moments of ritual and celebration. Music, rhythm, and mimicry may have accompanied these events. Celebration reinforced community. It strengthened bonds, passed knowledge, and encoded memory. Humans were discovering joy, ritual, and the power of shared experience. Survival had become intertwined with culture. Chapter 40. Reflections in the Firelight. Around the fire, humans began to reflect. Observing shadows, listening to stories, and considering the past, they glimpsed consciousness beyond mere survival. Questions emerged. Why do animals behave as they do? How can the group endure? What is the place of humans in the world? These reflections were early philosophy, subtle yet profound. Humans were not only shaping tools and shelters, they were shaping thought. Survival was no longer only about the body, it was about mind, memory, and imagination. Chapter 41. Into the Unknown. Humans ventured into lands that tested every limit. Snow-covered plains, arid deserts, and dense mangroves became arenas of adaptation. Every landscape demanded ingenuity, patience, and cooperation. Paths were mapped in memory, resources rationed, and movements carefully timed. Survival depended on awareness of the environment and of each other. These migrations were not accidental. They were calculated risks guided by necessity and curiosity. Crossing into the unknown reshaped humans. Bodies grew stronger, minds sharper. Observing patterns in weather, animal behavior, and terrain became instinct. Humans were no longer passive participants. They were strategists, explorers, and early engineers of their own survival. Chapter 42, Survival in Harsh Climates. Cold winds cut across plains, freezing rivers trapped water, and blizzards obscured landmarks. Survival demanded innovation. Hides became clothing. Fires were kept constantly alive. Shelters were reinforced against snow and wind. Humans adapted behaviors to the seasons. Food was stored, foraging became strategic, and hunting techniques evolved for scarce resources. Memory and foresight became as essential as strength or dexterity. The mind became a survival instrument. Humans learned to predict danger, plan long-term, and understand the subtle rhythms of the natural world. Adaptation was no longer instinctive alone, it was intentional, reflective, and cumulative. Chapter 43, Advanced Hunting Techniques. Hunting grew more sophisticated. Spears were thrown, traps were set, and ambushes were coordinated across terrain. Observation of prey became almost scientific. Migration patterns, mating behaviors, and group dynamics were studied and remembered. Cooperation was crucial. Humans learned to anticipate each other's movements, assign roles, and trust in collective strategy. Each hunt was a rehearsal of skill, memory, and communication. Failure could mean starvation. Success reinforced knowledge and strengthened community bonds. Hunting was no longer just survival. It was practice in planning, leadership, and foresight. It became a reflection of the mind as much as the body. Chapter 44, The Spark of Trade. Distance, risk, and resource scarcity inspired exchange. Humans began transporting materials over long distances. Shells, flints, pigments, and other rare items. These early exchanges were not markets. They were gestures of cooperation, trust, and survival. Trade reinforced social networks. Groups relied on each other for resources they could not access alone. Exchange of knowledge and tools became as vital as exchange of food. Humans discovered that collaboration could extend the boundaries of survival beyond what any single group could achieve. The seeds of economy, diplomacy, and interdependence were sown in these early acts of exchange. Chapter 45, Symbolic Thinking. Humans began to see patterns beyond immediate survival. Repeated marks, carvings, and pigments conveyed meaning. Certain symbols represented hunts, animals, or seasons. Others carried abstract significance, identity, memory, or reverence. Symbolic thinking allowed humans to plan, communicate, and imagine possibilities beyond the immediate. It connected past and future, individual and group, survival and culture. The mind began to externalize thought, creating permanence in an otherwise fleeting world. This subtle awareness would shape art, ritual, and eventually writing. Humans were beginning to think in layers, to perceive reality through the lens of meaning as well as observation. Chapter 46, Fire as Technology. Fire became more than a tool, it became infrastructure. Humans learned to transport embers, control burns, and manage warmth across landscapes. Fire was used for cooking, protection, and light, and it became central to social and spiritual life. The control of fire represented mastery over nature and a leap in abstract thought. Humans were now manipulating elements outside their immediate reach, extending their influence across time and space. Fire was not just survival, it was transformation. Chapter 47: Shelter and Structure. Shelters evolved from temporary lean-tos to semi-permanent constructions. Branches were interwoven, hides secured, and structures reinforced against wind, rain, and cold. Shelter became social space. Around fire and walls, humans shared knowledge, celebrated success, and nurtured the young. Architecture, though primitive, reflected planning, foresight, and understanding of materials. Humans were shaping their environment to reflect and protect themselves, asserting control over the natural world. Chapter 48: The Ritual of Memory. Groups began encoding memory in tangible forms. Objects, marks, and spatial arrangements carried meaning. Hunting success, seasonal cycles, and social events were remembered and repeated through ritual. Memory was no longer solely mental, it was externalized, communal, and cumulative. Humans could plan beyond their lifespan, preserve wisdom, and connect generations through shared knowledge. Survival became intertwined with reflection, memory, and cultural continuity. Chapter 49: Preliminary Spirituality. Humans began perceiving forces beyond the tangible. Certain animals, celestial events, and natural phenomena became imbued with meaning. Lightning, storms, eclipses, they were interpreted, revered, and woven into narrative. Early spirituality shaped behavior, respect for animals, careful observation of natural cycles, and moral codes of cooperation were reinforced. Humans were developing a sense of order, ethics, and responsibility that extended beyond the immediate threat of survival. Chapter 50: Reflections on Ingenuity. By now, humans had learned to combine observation, memory, cooperation, and innovation. They manipulated tools, controlled fire, navigated continents, and encoded knowledge externally. The human mind was awakening, fully capable of abstract thought, strategic planning, and symbolic representation. Humans had transcended immediate survival. They were not only living, they were learning, imagining, and shaping their destiny. Chapter 51: Hunting as Ceremony. Hunting had evolved beyond necessity. It became a shared experience, ritualized and deliberate. Preparation, coordination, and execution were as much about skill as identity. Groups would observe prey for days, noting patterns, weaknesses, and behavior. Ambushes were rehearsed. Roles were assigned: drivers, flankers, guards, and hunters. Each action depended on trust, timing, and understanding. The hunt became a form of instruction, teaching patience, strategy, and cooperation. Success was celebrated, failure analyzed. Humans were learning that survival was both practical and symbolic, an interplay between the physical and the social. Hunting was not only about sustenance, it was about cohesion, teaching, and identity. Chapter 52: Emerging Hierarchies. As groups grew, hierarchies naturally formed. Leadership was not absolute. It relied on skill, knowledge, and respect. Experienced hunters led expeditions. Elders guided learning. Caregivers influenced decisions through experience. Hierarchy was subtle but critical. Those who could anticipate danger, read the environment, or mediate disputes gained influence. Leadership became about foresight rather than force alone. Cooperation was balanced with authority. Humans were discovering that survival depended not only on strength, but on social intelligence. Structure allowed groups to function effectively, especially in the harsh and unpredictable world they inhabited. Chapter 53: Identity and Belonging. Within tribes, identity began to emerge. Clothing made from hides, ornaments from shells, and body marks conveyed affiliation, skill, and status. Individuals became recognizable, not just biologically, but socially. Belonging reinforced survival. Groups with strong cohesion protected one another, shared resources, and transmitted knowledge. Identity became intertwined with culture and ritual, marking humans not only as survivors, but as members of a shared lineage. Humans were learning that the social environment was as vital as the physical. Connection mattered. Belonging mattered. Trust mattered. These were lessons encoded in daily life, observation, and interaction. Chapter 54: Language refines. Language deepened. Simple gestures and sounds became structured, consistent, and meaningful. Sequences were repeated. Abstract concepts emerged. Humans could warn of distant danger, describe complex hunts, or teach skills in detail. Language allowed memory to transcend the individual. Knowledge, strategies, and traditions became cumulative, shared across generations. Humans were no longer limited to instinct and observation. They could plan, teach, and imagine collectively. Communication shaped thought. Humans were learning to think in layers, cause and effect, past and future, self and group. The mind was evolving in parallel with culture. Chapter 55: Symbolic Settlements. Settlements were more than shelter, they were expression. Simple arrangements of stones, sticks, and hides created recognizable patterns: homes, gathering spaces, and ritual areas. The organization of space reflected social relationships, roles, and priorities. Certain areas were designated for cooking, others for tools, and some for ritual. Humans were beginning to design not only survival, but experience. Settlements preserved memory. Patterns communicated function and meaning. They were early blueprints of civilization, encoded in material form. Humans were shaping both the land and their collective identity. Chapter 56: Ritual and Symbol. Rituals became a thread linking generations. Seasonal ceremonies marked hunts, births, and migrations. Symbols carved bones, painted stones, and natural pigments reinforced meaning and continuity. Ritual was more than ceremony. It encoded knowledge, reinforced social bonds, and shaped behavior. It taught children observation, cooperation, and respect. Humans were creating culture as much as survival strategies. These acts reflected an expanding consciousness. Humans were aware not only of their environment, but of their role within it. They were observers and participants, learners and teachers. Chapter 57: Memory and Teaching. Memory was externalized. Lessons were preserved in symbols, rituals, and storytelling. Elders guided, children observed, and the group learned collectively. Teaching became intentional. Mistakes were analyzed. Skills were demonstrated. The transfer of knowledge became as critical as the acquisition of food. Survival was inseparable from education, and culture was inseparable from life itself. Humans were creating continuity and archive of experience that extended beyond the lifespan of any individual. Chapter 58. Art and Abstraction. Art became more sophisticated. Patterns on stones, bones, and hides reflected observation, abstraction, and imagination. Animals, landscapes, and symbolic forms appeared in repeated motifs. Art encoded knowledge, identity, and spirituality. It allowed humans to reflect on their environment, anticipate consequences, and communicate meaning across time. Humans were experimenting with permanence, abstraction, and creativity. Art was survival transformed into reflection. Chapter 59. Early Spirituality. Spirituality deepened. Celestial events, animal behavior, and natural phenomena were interpreted as signs. Rituals reinforced ethical behavior, cooperation, and respect for life. Belief systems helped humans navigate risk, uncertainty, and social tension. They provided frameworks for morality and behavior. Humans were not only surviving, they were constructing meaning in an unpredictable world. Spirituality was intertwined with memory, teaching, and art, creating a holistic worldview that extended beyond the immediate demands of life. Chapter 60. Reflection and Consciousness. By this point, humans had evolved beyond simple reaction. Memory, planning, cooperation, and symbolism combined to create conscious awareness. Humans could contemplate themselves, their environment, and their relationships. They could imagine alternatives, evaluate risks, and teach future generations. Survival was no longer purely instinctive, it was reflective, strategic, and cultural. The mind had become the most powerful tool. Humans were not merely living, they were thinking, imagining, and shaping the world around them. Consciousness had emerged, and with it, the foundation of everything to come. Chapter 61. The Toolmaker's Mind. Tools were no longer simple. Humans began designing them for specific tasks: scrapers for hides, points for hunting, and chisels for woodworking. Each tool reflected foresight and experimentation. Observation and memory guided innovation. A broken tool taught lessons. A successful one inspired refinement. Humans were thinking ahead, anticipating problems, and solving them before they arose. Tool-making became both survival and cognition. Hands expressed thought, bridging imagination and action. The mind and body worked together in ways unseen in any other species. Each crafted object was a testament to ingenuity, shaping not just survival, but identity and culture. Chapter 62. Migration into the Extremes. Humans ventured into deserts, tundras, and mountain passes. Scarcity tested endurance. Cold, heat, and wind demanded adaptation. Clothing, shelter, and fire were essential. Knowledge of water, food sources, and animal behavior dictated movement. Humans measured risk, planned routes, and timed journeys with precision. Migration forged resilience. It demanded observation, cooperation, and foresight. Groups who adapted survived. Those who could not vanished. Every step into harsh lands expanded the human capacity for problem-solving, endurance, and innovation. Chapter 63. Cooperative hunting evolves. Hunting reached new complexity. Humans coordinated ambushes over greater distances, planned multi-day pursuits, and anticipated prey behavior. Roles were clearly defined:
Hold it steady.
drivers, flankers, guards, and hunters.
Yes, good.
Communication,
Now strike
gestures,
firmly.
and subtle signals
Hold it
ensured
steady like this.
efficiency.
Angle the
Success
hamstring
relied
here.
on trust,
Yes,
timing, and
Now strike
foresight.
firmly.
Hunting became both
Great bison
education
vines.
and ritual.
We follow
Each
the
hunt
paths of
taught
those who came
skills,
before us,
reinforced
guided by
hierarchy,
their hands.
and strengthened bonds. Humans were practicing strategy, teamwork, and leadership skills essential for both survival and social cohesion. Chapter 64: Prototrade Networks. Humans began exchanging tools, pigments, shells, and other rare materials. Trade was not only practical, it built alliances, reinforced relationships, and expanded knowledge. Groups transported
Great
resources
bison
over
vines.
long distances, sharing
Follow the
innovation,
paths of those who
techniques,
came before
and
us,
cultural
guided
practices.
by their hands.
The exchange of goods became the exchange of ideas, reinforcing social cohesion beyond immediate tribes. Trade networks, though rudimentary, allowed humans to shape not only survival, but society itself. Cooperation extended the boundaries of life, creating connections across landscapes and generations. Chapter 65: The Evolution of Storytelling. Stories became more complex, precise, and
Hold it
instructive.
steady like this.
Around fires,
Angle the
humans
hamstring
recounted
here.
hunts, migrations,
good.
and
Now
lessons
strike
learned.
firmly.
Tales
great
included
bison
cautionary
vines.
narratives,
Follow
strategy,
the paths
and
of those who
success,
came before
passing
us,
knowledge to
guided
younger
by their
members.
hands.
Storytelling allowed humans to reflect on experience, plan for the future, and encode collective memory. Imagination became a survival tool. Humans could simulate scenarios, anticipate danger, and prepare for challenges yet unseen. Stories were identity, culture, and education all at once. Humans were no longer merely surviving, they were recording, teaching, and shaping experience. Chapter 66: Symbols and Signs. Humans refined symbolic behavior. Pigments, carvings, and marks became consistent, recognizable, and meaningful. Certain signs indicated territory, resources, or ritual significance. Symbolic systems extended memory, reinforced social structure,
Hold it
and
steady
communicated
like this.
knowledge beyond the
Angle the
limits of
hamstring here.
speech.
Yes.
They allowed groups
Now
to
strike
anticipate,
firmly.
plan, and coordinate more effectively. Symbols reflected thought beyond survival. They conveyed meaning, identity, and shared
Steady like
understanding.
this.
Humans
Angle the
were learning to
hamstring here.
structure reality
Yes, good.
through
Now
abstract
strike
concepts. Chapter
Great bison
67:
provides.
Complex Shelter
Follow the
and
paths of
Settlement.
those who came
Shelters
before us,
evolved into
guided by their hands.
semi-permanent settlements. Stones, branches, and hides were arranged with purpose. Sleeping areas, cooking spaces, tool stations, and ritual zones. Settlements reflected social organization and priorities. Space communicated hierarchy, roles, and function. Communities became cohesive, with shared knowledge and memory embedded in architecture. Humans were not only shaping survival, they were shaping experience.
Great bison
The
provides.
environment became a canvas
Follow
for
the paths
strategy,
of those who came
identity,
before
and
us,
culture.
guided by their
Chapter 68: Fire as Cultural Anchor. Fire became central to both survival and culture. Beyond
Hold it
warmth
steady
and
like this.
protection, it served
Angle
as
the
a locus
hammerstone
for
here.
storytelling,
Yes, good.
teaching,
Now
and
strike
ritual.
firmly.
The management of fire
Great
required
bison
foresight.
provides.
Embers were
Follow the
transported,
paths of
fuels
those who
prepared,
came
and
before
flames
us,
controlled.
guided by their hands.
Fire extended the day, preserved food, and transformed the landscape of human activity. Humans were mastering an element of nature, creating safety, knowledge, and community. Fire symbolized both power and consciousness, a reflection of the human mind at work. Chapter 69: Spiritual Reflection. Humans interpreted natural phenomena as signs of unseen forces. Celestial events, animal behavior, and seasonal cycles were imbued with meaning.
Yes, good.
Spirituality guided action.
The great
Respect
bison
for life,
provides.
cooperation, and
Follow the
caution
paths of
were
those
reinforced
before
through
us,
ritualized
guided by their
behavior.
hands.
Humans were creating frameworks for morality, order, and understanding ways to navigate a dangerous, unpredictable world. Spirituality intertwined with art, storytelling, and ritual, deepening the connection between mind, society, and environment. Humans were cultivating consciousness, ethics, and reflection simultaneously. Chapter 70: Culture and Consciousness. By now, humans combined observation, memory, cooperation, symbolic thought, and innovation into culture.
The great
Knowledge
bison
was preserved
provides.
across generations
Follow
through
the paths
teaching,
of those who came
ritual, and
before us,
storytelling.
guided by their
Consciousness had emerged fully. Humans could reflect on the past, anticipate the future, and plan collectively. Survival was intertwined with reflection, creativity, and society. Humans were not only living, they were shaping thought, identity, and culture itself. The foundation of civilization, education, and art was being laid, one action, one story, one fire at a time.